What is the idea of the garden and what are the main features?
Well, the garden came from the idea that in London we have about 4 days worth of food actually in the capital. If the food stops, we starve. So the idea here is to try and demonstrate that you should really, if you're living in a city, try and plant food if you possibly can, because we need to. The main features of the garden, we show a 9-metre high tower, which is a green wall, which is showing herbs, tomatoes, peppers. That's all fed from a hydroponic system, just water. That's one side. Then we have a photovoltaic wall, which is basically a system converting daylight into electricity, and that helps to irrigate. We use that power to irrigate. It's got a wind turbine on the top, and onto one side we have a propagation unit, which is a bit like a greenhouse, vertical greenhouse, but all these features are about 9 metres high, so we've sort of elongated them, and that really is trying to encourage people to grow things on balconies, on terraces, vertical surfaces in the city, because we need the food.
What about the glass part?
The glass in the actual tower is for propagation, basically. But on one side it's the photovoltaic panels, the other side is for propagation, so like a greenhouse. And then on the ground we have a fish table. It's called a fish table. That's what we call it. The lid is actually for fish. So we've almost taken the fish out of the pond below, or the pool below the table, and put them in the lid, so that while you're eating or having your meal, your banquet, hopefully using food from the wall, you can then see the fish swimming under your plate.
What about the plants in the garden?
Everything in the garden is edible, and we haven't gone for the usual sorts of thing. About 90% of the world's food comes from only about 50 species. So we're trying to demonstrate that on this garden you can get food from quite different sources, quite interesting sources as well. Places where you might not think you can get something from, say, an Aiasaade, but the fruits from the Aiasaade are very edible and quite enjoyable to eat. So that's what we're trying to do with this garden. It's not obvious, but everything in it actually is edible.
What about the hostas and the ferns and roses?
Yeah, the roses, everything from the roses, I'm led to believe, is edible. The leaves, the petals. The hostas, I think the Japanese quite like the hostas. They boil them up and they're part of their diet, or can be part of their diet. But I must admit, I hadn't heard of that one before we researched it. So there you go. There's another species of plant that you can actually eat.
And the bleached trees?
The limes are pleached. Again, they're there because the blossoms are used in tea. And then the mulberries are also bleached, but they're on the horizontal here. And of course the fruits from the mulberries are very edible and quite enjoyable to eat as well.
So if you would take any planter here from this garden and place it in any London garden, you would have like a lovely, let's say, herb garden?
Yeah, I think what we've done here is, you can see this on a grand scale, but actually in your own garden you can take parts from the garden and say, oh, I could see that happening. You can make your own vertical planters, rig up an irrigation system from the top down, and you can actually do that on a smaller scale. And you can take lots of plants from this garden and actually have a reasonable sort of foodie type garden. So I think it does work on a smaller scale.